Okay, we'll just jump right in here. Borderlands 4 on the two systems. On the right here, we have the higher wattage non-S variant. And we can just pause right here and take a look. We can see there is a fairly different performance gap here. 40 FPS on average on the left, 52 on the right. That's coming down to wattages. So the GPU on the right, 135 watts, CPU 50-ish. On the left there, the GPU is limited to 100 watts with a 30-watt CPU. So that we're going to see throughout this video where the difference in wattages on the CPU and the GPU can potentially result in different performance levels on the two different laptops. Okay, and here we're going to flip over to two different scaling modes. So on the right there, of course, we did have the higher performance on the thicker laptop, but what happens if we increase the scaling mode on the left? So the right laptop, the non-S, is going to have balance scaling. The left laptop is going to have performance scaling. Otherwise, they're exactly the same, badass presets. And we can see here they get a lot closer now. So all of a sudden, we're at 50-ish FPS on both of them on average. Of course, when you start to play for a bit, they might separate up, go up and down in that. But you can see here that on the left laptop, the thinner one, generally speaking, at least in this case, going to performance scaling versus balanced will start to even things out a little bit in this case. Now, I may not be the biggest frame gen guy. Typically, I don't use it that much. But if you can get a good base frame rate, around 45, 50, especially 60, and then you turn it on, it's not that big of a deal, especially in non-competitive games. You can see here 2 times frame gen. You can go 4 if you want, but this is just 2 times on both of them. And again, performance scaling on the left, balance scaling on the right to kind of even them out. And you can see they're both performing well, like pretty well here. So the lower wattages does impact performance, but if you do add a little bit more scaling, you can start to even it out a little bit here. And it's doing quite well in both cases. So let's just play for a sec. Okay, now here's Cyberpunk 2077, same laptop on left and right type thing here. And we can see we are at ultra native, so 1600p ultra native, no scaling. And again, performance gap between them. They're both doing very well. I mean, the S is doing a little under 60, but still very playable. The right is doing a fair bit over 60, of course, very playable. Biggest difference we're going to see here, though, is the difference in wattages. I mean, we have a total peak wattage on the right that's going to be much higher. So if we look here, we just pause. The system on the left, a little under 100 watts on the GPU, but the CPU is way up like 160. On the right there, the GPU is pulling 140, and the CPU is also up around the same, around 60 watts. So clearly this game wants to pull around 60 watts on the CPU. And as we play here for another moment, you can see here that the slimmer laptop is not able to maintain those higher wattages on the CPU consistently. It wants to be about 130 watt system total. So what we can see here is the performance starts to drop down as the CPU drops down to 30 again. And in both cases here, we're going to run some balanced DLSS left and right, otherwise exactly the same, ultra. And you can see there, again, fairly significant performance gap between them. The laptop on the right is pulling ahead as well, 10, 15 watts, or 10 or 15 FPS over here. So it's quite good. And you can see if we just kind of pause here for a moment, same idea, higher CPU overhead, higher GPU overhead, resulting in more performance, but both are doing well. And here's some Doom the Dark Ages. We're on Ultra Nightmare, and we don't have any scaling. We have the extra path tracing turned off, however. Just kind of see how it goes. Turbo mode for both. And you can see that pretty typical performance gap here again. It's another game that's going to pull a lot of CPU. You can see the GPU is actually going down below 100 on the left laptop because that CPU is pulling so many watts. But, I mean, they're both doing well. The non-S is able to pull essentially 60 FPS at Ultra Nightmare native here. The one on the left, 15. Okay, and then we'll have a little bit of scaling on the left on the slimmer laptop and just see how it performs versus native on the right. And you can see, obviously, the slimmer laptop is able to actually pull ahead slightly, in at least average, with some scaling. And then when we throw scaling on both of them here, so this is balanced scaling on both of them. Of course, once again, the non-slim laptop is able to pull ahead here, and fairly considerable here. The lows are much higher. The average is a fair bit higher, but especially the lows is where we're seeing here. And a lot of that is going to come down to the CPU. You can see that the CPU gap here is quite a bit. And once again, that can make a big difference on the lows, even more so than the GPU. Again, they're both performing very well, very admirably for what they are. However, if you want more performance, you go for the bigger laptop. More slimness, you go for the slimmer laptop. Now, of course, neither of these laptops are ray tracing monsters, but the 5070 Ti is a ray tracing capable GPU with a reasonable amount of power. So we'll throw on ray tracing here. We still are on Ultra Nightmare, but we're now going to have performance scaling, and we're going to have that path tracing, the extra ray tracing on there. And you can actually see that they get a little bit closer to one another because, I mean, now we're really slamming the GPU. The CPU is obviously still important here, but the GPU is really putting in a lot of work here in these ray tracing settings. And I mean, again, they're both playable. The one on the right here, the non-slim, I'd consider that, like console quality mode and really good for that. The one on the left here, again, console quality mode where typically your consoles are shooting for 30 and here we're getting more like 40, 45. So both good. You might want to decrease the settings a little bit there, maybe put it down to an Ultra Nightmare, but either way, if you want to go for a fidelity type experience here, both work in both cases. Okay, and here is a little bit of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We're just going to go with max settings and native here, so pretty impressive, obviously. This game does run well overall on these GPUs, but also at the same time, it doesn't run overall that well on PC hardware in general. Even my 5070 Ti desktop struggles on this. You can just see the kind of traversal stutter as we shoot around. Generally speaking, when you get new textures popping in, new kind of stuff popping in, it starts to slow down quite a bit, especially on the lows, but the average can stay up. But we'll just pause here for a second, just right before a battle, kind of see what's going on here. Pretty big performance gap between them, to be honest. Again, part of that is going to be CPU and GPU. This game wants a lot of GPU, but it does kind of also want a little bit of CPU, and you can see on the left there, it's just choking a little bit. Again, this is native, and it's doing okay overall. And then just getting into the actual battle, it gets messy overall. It'll be up and down and up and down and up and down. But what you can see here overall is that the thicker laptop with more CPU basically is able to maintain those lows, right? So both cases, the GPU is really pulling. You can see some of them on the left, it's getting up to like 115 even, but the CPU is really choking as a result, and it's not able to keep those lows up. So once again, the thicker laptop is going to perform better. That's kind of the point here. They're both loud. This one has a higher pitched noise than this. This one has a lower pitched noise. So this one's more of a, if you care, it is slightly noisier. The max performance here, they're the same settings, very high with balanced DLSS. Doesn't really matter, but you can see here 135, 117. So you're getting 20 extra frames on the non-S. The reason for that is it's higher watts, right? So 100 watts on the GPU here, 130 to 135 watts. So about 30 watts more here. This is about 30% more wattages, which these GPUs do kind of go up like this, and they do sort of level off, but they don't just go right across. They will continue to increase after a while. So more watts here will increase the performance, right? Looks like they have a little bit of like AI type stuff, and it looks like some of that's settled in here a little bit. Right now we're not quite as high, but we're still 20% higher, which makes sense, right? 20 frames more, 18 to 20 frames more, so 15 to 20% more performance. Not like GPU tier. It's not like you went from a 5070 to a 5070 Ti, nothing like that. This will still be a 5070, especially in the average, more VRAM, all that kind of stuff. In both cases, we're over 8 gigabytes of VRAM, 8.8, 8.8. So the 5070, 5060, 5050 would be choking on VRAM. CPU here, 61, CPU here, 30. So we have two things going on here. We have more allocation of watts to the CPU, more allocation of watts to the GPU for both cases. This is not the heaviest GPU game. That's one of the reasons that I picked this. But you can see here that there's just more watts allowed here. Right here we're at almost 200 watts combined. Here we're at like 130 watts combined, right? So there's a big difference there in how much it's going to be allocated. And despite that, this is running cooler. So the 5070 Ti is 75 degrees, 85 degrees over here. The GPU here, 86 degrees. The GPU is 79 degrees. Now, I'm not going to complain about that too much because, again, this is not like a true gaming laptop per se in terms of like, it's focused as much on performance. This is a pure gaming laptop. It's still relatively thin and sleek and all that, but it's focused on performance, thermals, cooling, all that kind of stuff, as you can see here. Right? Both of these are running very well. This one here, it's focused on a balance between portability, sleekness, discreteness, and also gaming. Kind of like, there's a certain segment of laptops,
There's like the G16 from Asus. Those are, hybrid style laptops. I use a Lenovo Yoga 9i Pro right now, which is still kind of hybrid, but this is a hybrid gaming laptop. The Yoga 9i Pro is a hybrid creator laptop. They can both do creative tasks. They can both game. They're both portable, but it depends where on the spectrum they are. This one is leaning a little bit more towards gaming. Mine's leaning a little bit more towards creators, but both good. This is a gaming laptop over to the gaming side, and that makes sense, right? So you're going to get good performance. Again, I'm not going to test a bunch of games in this video because this is more of a comparative review. I'll have more games in the future in other videos, probably coming right after these. I'm not sure which one I'll do first, but whatever. However, it is good performance. Like, we're getting 115 to 130 F5 FPS in Spiderman with very high presets. It's quite good, to be honest. We'll decrease that setting there. It's much quieter. I don't often game in turbo mode because it's so loud. And you can see here we're still allocating pretty good watts. So the GPU is still like 125 or so. So it's still very respectable. And the CPU has dropped down, but we're still at 40. And so the actual performance here is barely changed. Right? We're at about 130-ish FPS. We lost a few FPS. Here it's dropped a little bit. Still not way down, but it's not as high, right? So now separation's probably about the same, interestingly, between them. But we're lower watts here. So we went 125 watts down to 90 watts, 27 versus 38, 30, 40. It does show you how efficient the 5070 Ti and the 275HX are, right? Because, yes, this one's more powerful, so the peak is higher, but as we decrease each tier, this is still keeping up, right? Each tier, the 5070 Ti and the 275HX are keeping up regardless. It's just, if you're at a higher tier, you get better performance, right? So that's kind of where we're at here. This one's always going to be higher because it's a higher watts, but they're kind of going down with each other. Let's go one more here. We'll go balance now. Okay, so one more down. You can also notice that the lows are pretty good. I haven't been paying too much attention to them, but they're pretty good. We're still doing reasonably well on the lows here. Like 1% lows, very high, well over 60, and even the 0.1% lows are pretty damn good, right? Not bad. Now you can see they're closing the gap a little bit here, right? Because the watts are closer. So on that balance mode here, we're at 85 versus 75, so there's only a 10-watt separation between them, and the CPUs are pretty close now too, 26 versus 33. So at the high end, the Neo Non-S is able to really pull ahead, and then as you slowly decrease the wattages, this one comes down faster, right? And so you end up closer to one another. So on this balance mode now, they're actually operating pretty close to each other. This is still faster because it's more watts, but they're pretty close. This is also running hotter, right? So at each iteration that we go through here, it's still going to run hotter. It's a thinner laptop with thinner heat pipes. And now, this one is now quieter. This is still reasonably quiet, but this is quieter. A couple more dB over here. It's also the tone of it. It's just slightly higher pitched. Okay, so now we'll go down to silent here. And you'll see that interestingly, or quiet they call it, even on quiet mode, these are very performant, right? That's one of the advantages of these new Arrow Lake chips. They're very efficient for the CPU. And the NVIDIA Blackwell stuff, just like the previous generation, Ampere, is very efficient as well. But there's a pretty big drop here now. Now they split, right? Because the silent mode here, we're going down to 75 or 80, which was the balanced over here. This one's way down to like 40-ish watts. CPU 20-ish. So here combined we're at like 55 to 60 watts, which is kind of crazy, to be honest. You could like fully game on USB-C here. Here we're still up quite a bit. We're close to 100. So we have like 40% higher wattage, even 50% higher wattages on this machine over here. So now on the silent mode, it pulls ahead 100 watts. Oh, sorry, 100 FPS. Low's still good. Low's still good over here, to be honest. It's really just affecting the average, which is interesting. But there's a big gap in performance here. Now we're looking at about a 30 to 35% performance gap. However, this is still pretty damn good, right? We're on silent mode here, running at 60 to 70 watts combined total. And look at the performance, right? Like, it's really good. They're both very quiet. I can hear a little bit more noise out of this one, but they're both running really good now. The GPU is finally down a little bit cooler here because the watts are so low. The CPU is a little warmer over here, but not much. It's really good, right? I have been using these laptops quite a bit over the past few weeks, I've said several times, and I've been gaming a bit on them, and honestly, I just throw into silent mode most of the time because it's just on both of them. It's good, right? It's very impressive. So, yeah, let's turn around here. We'll go like that. We'll go back into the performance mode one more time. Again, this is not the be-all end-all video. I'm going to have follow-up gaming testing, so I highly suggest you keep an eye out for that if you want to see lots of really demanding titles. It's just because the videos become too much if you do that otherwise, all at one go. Right, and in the performance mode, you can see they're separating out. Again, so in the top end and the low end, the non-S is ahead at the highest mode and the lowest mode. And then in those middle modes, they get closer, right? They get closer to one another. So that's interesting. And it's just due to wattages and cooling and that kind of stuff. But you can see here, I mean, we're doing well in both cases, right? These are both doing really well. Okay, sure, okay. They're both doing really well regardless, right? Both very performant. So, I mean, pick your poison. You want the thinner laptop, a little bit sleeker, loose in performance. You want the thicker laptop, a little bit better performance, but less sleek. It's your pick. I think they're both very good. From a raw performance standpoint, obviously, the non-S is better.